Amara Cole moved through the glittering charity gala like a shadow, invisible in her black uniform, serving wine to New York's wealthiest elite who never bothered to learn her name. She was just another waitress, keeping her head down and her secrets buried deep. But when she greeted the intimidating Sicilian billionaire in a dialect from a village half a world away, everything stopped. The old man froze, his eyes locked onto hers with shocking intensity, because those words in that exact accent should have been impossible for her to know. In that single moment, decades of carefully guarded secrets began to unravel, and Amara's grandmother's buried past was about to collide with her present in ways that would change everything she thought she knew about family, identity, and who she was meant to become. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light across the marble floors of the Whitmore estate, their glow reflecting off champagne flutes and diamond jewelry. Tonight, the old European-style mansion hosted one of the city's most exclusive charity galas. Wealthy elites moved through the grand ballroom in designer gowns and tailored suits, their laughter floating above the string quartet's melody. Waitstaff in crisp black uniforms weaved between guests, balancing silver trays with practiced precision. Among them was Amara Cole, a 24-year-old woman who had perfected the art of being invisible. She kept her eyes lowered as she navigated the crowd, her movements careful and deliberate. The tray in her hands held crystal wine glasses filled with expensive Bordeaux, each one worth more than her weekly paycheck. Amara had learned early in her 2 years of catering work that the best servers were the ones guests never really noticed. She was a striking young woman, though she did everything possible to downplay it. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight, neat bun. Her uniform was spotless but unremarkable. She wore no jewelry except for a small silver chain her mother had given her years ago, tucked beneath her collar where no one could see it. Everything about Amara's presence suggested someone who wanted to blend into the background, to do her job and disappear. But tonight felt different somehow. Amara couldn't shake the tension coiling in her stomach as she refilled glasses and cleared empty plates. Maybe it was exhaustion. She'd worked a double shift at the diner that morning before coming here, and her feet ached in the required black heels. Or maybe it was worry about her mother, whose medical bills seemed to grow larger every month while her health grew more fragile. Amara paused near one of the tall windows overlooking the estate's gardens, pretending to rearrange glasses on her tray while giving her feet a brief rest. From her coat pocket in the staff room upstairs, a small notebook waited. It was filled with phrases in different languages, words and expressions she'd collected over the years like precious stones. She didn't talk about the notebook with anyone. It was private, a reminder of something she'd spent most of her life trying to forget. "Excuse me, miss?" A woman's voice pulled Amara from her thoughts. "Could I have a glass of the white?" "Of course, ma'am." Amara's voice was soft, polite, almost apologetic. She served the woman and moved on quickly, disappearing back into the crowd. Across the ballroom, Daniel Whitmore stood with a group of investors, his smile professional but strained. At 38, he'd built his family's company into a billion-dollar empire, but tonight he looked uncomfortable in his own home. He kept glancing toward the entrance, checking his watch, his jaw tight with tension. Daniel was tall and lean, with dark blonde hair starting to gray at the temples. He had the kind of refined appearance that came from generations of wealth, but there was something genuine in his blue eyes when he bothered to let people see it. Right now, though, those eyes were clouded with anxiety. "Expecting someone?" asked Richard Pemberton, one of his board members. Daniel forced a smile. "My father decided to fly in from Italy. Last minute." Several heads turned. Alessandro Whitmore's name still carried weight in certain circles, even though he'd been semi-retired for over a decade. He'd left the corporate world behind to live in Sicily, maintaining only minimal contact with his son and the business he'd helped build. "I didn't realize you two were on speaking terms," Richard said carefully. We're not. Not really. Daniel took a long drink of his scotch. He called yesterday, said he had business in New York and wanted to attend. I couldn't exactly say no. The truth was more complicated. Daniel and his father had barely spoken in 5 years, not since a bitter argument about the company's direction and Daniel's personal choices. Alessandro had always been demanding, critical, impossible to please. Their relationship had been strained for as long as Daniel could remember, built more on obligation than affection. A ripple of whispers suddenly moved through the crowd near the entrance. Daniel's shoulders tensed. He didn't need to turn around to know his father had arrived. Alessandro Whitmore, born Alessandro Vitali, 72 years ago in a small Sicilian village, entered the ballroom like he owned it, which in a way he once had. He was shorter than his son, but commanded twice the presence. His silver hair was swept back from a face carved by decades of pride and power. He wore an immaculate charcoal suit, and his dark eyes missed nothing as they swept across the room. The guests parted naturally as he walked through, some nodding respectfully, others whispering behind their hands. Alessandro's reputation preceded him. Stories circulated about his ruthless business tactics in his younger days, his mysterious past in Sicily before he'd come to America, the iron will that had built the Whitmore fortune from almost nothing. Daniel moved forward to greet him, their handshake formal and brief. Father, I'm glad you could make it. Daniel. Alessandro's accent still carried traces of Sicily despite 50 years in America. The estate looks well maintained. It wasn't a compliment, just an observation. That was how conversations between them always went, careful, measured, empty of real warmth. They stood together in awkward silence while guests approached to pay their respects. Alessandro accepted their greetings with aristocratic politeness, but his attention seemed elsewhere. His eyes kept scanning the room, restless and searching, though for what, no one could say. Amara had been refilling glasses at the far end of the ballroom when Alessandro arrived. She'd noticed the shift in energy, the way conversations paused and restarted. She didn't know who the older man was, only that he clearly mattered to these people. She kept her distance, focusing on her work, determined to stay invisible. But fate, or perhaps something else, had different plans. A senior staff member caught Amara's attention and gestured toward the main group, where Daniel and Alessandro stood. Take the wine to Mr. Whitmore and his guests, she instructed. The good bottles from the cellar. Amara's stomach tightened, but she nodded. She collected the tray of premium wines and made her way across the ballroom, keeping her breathing steady. This was just another table, another service. Nothing to worry about. She approached from Alessandro's left side, her movements quiet and professional. Daniel was speaking with an investor. Alessandro stood slightly apart, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Wine, sir. Amara's voice was barely above a whisper. Alessandro turned toward her, and for a moment their eyes met. His were dark and intense, carrying decades of experiences she couldn't begin to imagine. But there was something else there too, something that made her pulse quicken without understanding why. And then something inside Amara shifted. Maybe it was the exhaustion making her less careful. Maybe it was the way Alessandro's weathered face reminded her of old photographs she'd seen as a child. Or maybe it was just instinct, muscle memory from a part of her life she'd tried to bury. The words came out before she could stop them. Voscenza voglia un bicchiere di vino. The phrase was Sicilian dialect, rural and authentic, spoken with an accent that belonged to villages and hillsides far from this American mansion. It was the formal, respectful way of offering wine to an elder in the old country. The words shaped exactly as her grandmother had taught her mother, and her mother had whispered to her in childhood before deciding such things were better forgotten. The effect was instantaneous and stunning. Alessandro froze mid-breath. The color drained from his face, then rushed back. His hand, reaching for a glass, stopped in midair. He stared at Amara, as if she'd materialized from a dream he'd forgotten having. The conversations nearest to them faltered and died. Heads turned. The string quartet played on, but the music seemed suddenly distant, irrelevant. Daniel looked between his father and the waitress, confusion clear on his face. Father? What? Alessandro didn't respond to his son. His attention was completely, intensely focused on Amara. He studied her face with an expression that shifted from shock to something deeper, something almost like recognition or grief or both. Where? Alessandro's voice came out rough. He cleared his throat and started again, this time in the same Sicilian dialect Amara had used. Unim parastia pararia kasai. Where did you learn to speak like that? Several guests exchanged confused glances. The Italian they might have recognized, but this was something else entirely, rougher and older, the language of mountain villages and ancient traditions. Amara's hands trembled slightly on the tray. She hadn't expected him to respond in dialect. She hadn't expected any of this. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she scrambled for what to say. My family, sir. A long time ago. She switched back to English, her voice still soft but steady. May I pour your wine? But Alessandro wasn't ready to let it go. He continued in dialect, his words quiet but urgent. That accent is not from Palermo or Catania. That's mountain speech. Western Hills. Only people from one village speak exactly like that. Amara felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her now. Some guests looked amused, thinking she'd somehow embarrassed herself. Others sensed something deeper happening, a drama they didn't understand but couldn't look away from. Daniel's expression had shifted from confusion to alarm, clearly worried his father was about to cause a scene. Sir, I don't... Amara started, then stopped, because she did understand. Every word, the dialect that had been forbidden in her household growing up, that her mother had buried beneath assimilation and fear, came back to her as naturally as breathing. She switched to dialect one more time, keeping her voice low. A small glass for you, sir. Alessandro's eyes widened further. He opened his mouth to say something else, but Daniel finally intervened. Father, perhaps we should. Yes. Alessandro tore his gaze from Amara with visible effort and switched to English. Yes. Wine. Thank you. Amara poured with shaking hands, managing not to spill a drop despite her nerves. She set the bottle down carefully and stepped back, ready to disappear back into the crowd and the safety of invisibility. What is your name? Alessandro asked, still in English, but his accent thicker now, rougher with emotion. Amara, sir. Amara Cole. Cole. He repeated it as if testing it for truth. Your mother's name? This was going too far. Amara could feel the situation spinning beyond her control. I should return to my duties, sir. Excuse me. She turned and walked away quickly, but not so fast as to seem rude. Behind her, she heard Daniel's low voice speaking urgently to his father, but she couldn't make out the words. She didn't want to. Amara made it to the staff hallway before she had to stop and lean against the wall, her breath coming fast and shallow. What had she done? Why had she spoken in dialect? 24 years of her mother's warnings, of carefully maintaining distance from that old life, undone in a single moment of exhaustion and instinct. Girl, you okay? One of the other servers, Marcus, touched her shoulder gently. What happened out there? That old guy looked like he'd seen a ghost. I'm fine. Just tired. Amara straightened up, composing herself. It was nothing, but they both knew it wasn't nothing. Back in the ballroom, Alessandro stood motionless while guests resumed their conversations around him. Daniel waited, watching his father with growing concern. What just happened? Daniel finally asked. Alessandro didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was distant, lost in memory. That accent, that exact way of speaking, I haven't heard it in over 40 years. What are you talking about? The village where I was born, where I grew up. Alessandro's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. That girl speaks like someone who lived there. Learned from someone who lived there. But that's impossible. Why is it impossible? Alessandro finally looked at his son, and Daniel was startled to see genuine emotion in his father's eyes. Not the cold calculation he was used to, but something raw and unguarded. Because the people who spoke that way, they're all gone now, dead, or scattered across the world. No one teaches that dialect anymore. The village barely exists. He paused. No one should speak like that unless... Unless what? Alessandro shook his head slowly. I need to speak with her again. Properly. Not here. Absolutely not. Daniel's voice was firm. Father, I don't know what's going through your mind, but that woman is my employee. Whatever this is about, you can't. I would never harm her. Alessandro's tone was sharp, offended. I only want to understand. To ask where she learned. He trailed off, his gaze distant again. They stood in tense silence while the gala continued around them. Daniel had seen his father in many states over the years, angry, disappointed, coldly satisfied, but he'd never seen him like this. Shaken, almost vulnerable. Finally, Alessandro spoke quietly, more to himself than to Daniel. That accent, those exact words. Only people from one village speak like that. My village. And the only person I ever knew who might have taught someone to speak that way. He stopped, seeming to catch himself. Who? Daniel pressed. But Alessandro just shook his head. Old ghosts. It's nothing. I'm being foolish. Except they both knew he wasn't being foolish. Something significant had just happened, something neither of them fully understood yet. The rest of the evening passed in a strange blur. Amara kept to the edges of the room, avoiding the area where Alessandro stood. But you could feel his eyes on her periodically, watching, calculating. Not threatening, exactly, but intensely focused in a way that made her skin prickle with awareness. Other staff members noticed and began to whisper. By the time the gala ended and the last guest departed, rumors were already spreading through the service team. Did you see how that old man stared at Amara? What did she say to him? It sounded like Italian, but weird. Maybe she insulted him accidentally. She looked terrified. Or maybe he's just a creepy old rich guy. You know how they are. Amara changed out of her uniform in silence while the speculation swirled around her. She collected her paycheck from the event coordinator and headed for the staff exit, desperate to get home to her small apartment and pretend this night had never happened. But as she pushed through the service door into the cool night air, she found Daniel Whitmore waiting in the corridor. Miss Cole, may I have a word? Amara's stomach dropped. This was it. She was about to be fired for making the billionaire's father uncomfortable. Goodbye, paycheck. Goodbye, rent money. Goodbye, mother's medication. Of course, Mr. Whitmore. She kept her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Daniel gestured to a quiet alcove away from the other departing staff. His expression was hard to read, somewhere between concerned and curious. I want to apologize if my father made you uncomfortable tonight, he began. His behavior was unusual. It's fine, sir. I should apologize. I shouldn't have. No, please. You did nothing wrong. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that made him seem more human, less like the distant billionaire CEO. I'm just trying to understand what happened. That language you spoke, was it Sicilian? Amara hesitated. How much should she say? How much did she owe this man, her employer, beyond the basic service she'd already provided? Yes, sir. Sicilian dialect. I was exposed to it as child. I didn't mean to use it. It just came out. Exposed to it how? Through family. Sir, with respect, I don't see how this is relevant to my work. Daniel held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. You're right. You're absolutely right. I'm sorry for prying. He paused, then continued more carefully. I just want to make sure you're okay. My father can be intense. If he approaches you again, or makes you feel unsafe in any way. He didn't make me feel unsafe, Amara interrupted, surprised to find it was true. Alessandro had been shocked, intense, even unsettling, but not threatening. He just seemed surprised. That's an understatement. Daniel smiled slightly. the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. I've known my father my entire life, and I've never seen him react to anyone the way he reacted to you tonight. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Amara shifted her weight, exhausted and desperate to leave, but not sure if she'd been dismissed. Miss Cole, can I ask you something? Daniel's voice was gentler now. Where exactly did you learn to speak that dialect? I'm not asking as your employer. I'm asking because I think it might matter. To my father, and I haven't seen anything matter to him in a very long time. Amara looked at this wealthy, powerful man who seemed genuinely concerned and made a decision. Not to trust him completely, but to offer him something small and true. My grandmother was from Sicily. She came to America before I was born and never went back. My mother learned the dialect from her, and I learned pieces of it when I was very young. But we don't speak it anymore. We haven't in years. Why not? Because my mother wanted us to be American. Fully American. No old world ties, no complicated histories. Amara met his eyes directly. Sometimes people leave things behind for good reasons, Mr. Whitmore. Sometimes it's safer that way. Daniel absorbed this, nodding slowly. I understand that. More than you might think. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. If you need anything, or if my father contacts you and you want to talk about it first, you can reach me directly. My personal number is on the back. Amara took the card, surprised. Thank you, sir. And Miss Cole, you're a valued member of our event staff. I hope you'll continue to work for us. Despite tonight's unusual circumstances, relief flooded through her. Not fired then, still employed, still able to pay rent and buy mother's medication and slowly, painfully, build towards something better. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I appreciate that. She left through the service entrance and walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, her feet aching and her mind spinning. The night air was cool against her face, helping to clear some of the fog of exhaustion and anxiety. At home, her mother was asleep on the couch, the TV playing softly. Amara covered her with a blanket and stood watching her for a moment. Teresa Cole was only 52 but looked older, worn down by illness and years of hard work. Her breathing was labored even in sleep, her skin gray with fatigue. Amara went to her small bedroom and pulled out the notebook from her bag. She flipped through pages of French phrases, Spanish expressions, Italian vocabulary. And there, near the back, the Sicilian words and phrases her mother had taught her years ago before deciding such things were too dangerous to remember. She touched the page lightly, remembering her grandmother's voice from old recordings her mother had kept, hidden away in a box beneath her bed. The same voice that had taught these words, that had carried this accent across an ocean and through decades of silence. Only people from one village speak like that, Alessandro had said. Amara closed the notebook and shoved it back in her bag. Whatever connection existed between her family's past and that powerful, haunted old man, she wanted no part of it. She'd seen what happened when you opened doors to the past. You couldn't control what came through. She just needed to stay invisible, keep her head down, and let this strange night fade into memory. But sleep was hard to find that night, and when it came, her dreams were filled with a language she'd tried to forget in an old man's eyes, searching her face for ghosts from another lifetime. The next morning, Amara woke to her phone buzzing with messages. The catering company's group chat was exploding with gossip about last night's gala. Someone had apparently told someone else who had told everyone about the weird moment with the waitress and the old Italian guy. Amara silenced her phone and got ready for her shift at the diner. Just another day. Just another chance to be invisible and get through it. But when she arrived at the diner, her manager pulled her aside. Hey, Amara. Someone called asking about your schedule. Older guy, Italian accent. Said he was a potential client for catering work, but the manager looked uncomfortable. I don't know. Something fell off. I didn't give him anything, but I wanted you to know. Amara's blood ran cold. What did he say exactly? Just asked if you were working today and when your shift ended. I told him I couldn't share employee information, and he thanked me and hung up. Professional, but persistent, I guess. You know anyone like that? No. Thank you for not telling him anything. Amara forced a smile. Probably just some confused old guy. But she knew better. Alessandro was looking for her, and the thought filled her with equal parts fear and something else she couldn't quite name. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition of something inevitable unfolding. Her shift at the diner passed in a blur of coffee refills and breakfast orders. During her break, she finally checked her phone and found a message from an unknown number. Miss Cole, this is Daniel Whitmore. My father has asked me to pass along a request. He would very much like to speak with you, at your convenience, about your family history. No pressure, and absolutely no employment consequences regardless of your decision. He's staying at the plaza and can meet you anywhere you feel comfortable. I know this is strange. I'm still trying to understand it myself. DW. Amara stared at the message for a long time. The smart thing would be to ignore it, to maintain the boundaries between her small life and their vast wealth and complicated history. But something pulled at her, something deeper than logic or caution. The same instinct that had made her speak in dialect last night. The same connection to a past she'd never fully known. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on, I need some time to think about it. Daniel's reply came quickly. Of course. Take all the time you need. The days that followed were strange and tense. Amara went through her routines, diner shifts, evening classes in linguistics at the community college, visits to her mother's various doctor appointments. But her mind kept circling back to that moment in the ballroom. At the next catering event she worked, 3 days after the gala, the other staff members still whispered about her. Some looked at her with jealousy, assuming she'd caught the eye of a wealthy man. Others seemed protective, warning her to be careful around those people. Marcus, who'd been kind to her that night, cornered her during setup. Look, I don't know what that was about with the old man, but people are talking, saying maybe you've got some connection to the Whitmore family, or you're trying to get money out of them, or... He shrugged apologetically. Just watch yourself, okay? Rich folks got their own rules, and they don't always care who gets hurt. I'm not trying to get anything from anyone, Amara said firmly. I just want to do my job. I believe you. But they don't. Marcus gestured subtly at the other servers. Just be careful. That's all I'm saying. That evening, after the event ended, Amara found herself sitting on a bench in Central Park, watching the sun set over the skyline. Her mother had texted asking when she'd be home, but Amara couldn't face the small apartment yet, couldn't face the questions in her mother's eyes if she mentioned Alessandro's request. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel Whitmore. I hope I'm not overstepping, but my father shared something with me tonight that I think you should know. He said that in his village in Sicily, there was a tradition. When you greeted an elder with the formal phrases you used, it meant you were acknowledging family connection, not just showing respect. He said only children and grandchildren address their elders that way. He's convinced you didn't use those words by accident. He thinks you might be family. Amara's hands shook as she read the message again. Family. The word felt too big, too impossible. She thought of the old letters her mother kept hidden, the ones from her grandmother that she'd never been allowed to read, the ones written in Italian that her mother said were better left alone. The way her mother sometimes looked sad when she heard Italian music or saw pictures of Sicily on TV, then would quickly change the channel and pretend she hadn't noticed. Another message appeared. He's not trying to claim you or change your life. He just wants to understand, to know if there's a connection. And honestly, Miss Cole, so do I. Because if there is, it would mean I might have family I never knew existed. And that would matter to me. A lot. Amara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision pressing down on her. She could keep walking away, keep her life small and safe and separate from whatever complicated history Alessandro carried. That would be smart, simple, easier. Or she could step toward the truth, whatever it might be, and risk everything she'd carefully built on the foundation of her mother's determined silence. Her phone buzzed one more time. A different number, one she didn't recognize. The message was in Sicilian dialect. I'm an old man with many regrets. I left people behind once, long ago, because I was young and foolish and believed the lies I was told about duty and family honor. If there is even a chance that you carry the blood of those I abandoned, I owe you the truth. Not money, not obligation, just truth. Alessandro Vitale. Vitali. His birth name, the one from before he became Whitmore. The name that appeared in her grandmother's letters, hidden in her mother's closet in a box marked private. Do not open. Amara stood up from the bench, decision crystallizing. She typed a response in English, her hands steadier now. Sunday afternoon. Coffee shop on E72nd. I'll be there at 2. Come alone. 2 replies came almost simultaneously. From Daniel. Thank you. He'll be there. From Alessandro. Grazie. Thank you. Amara put her phone away and started walking home. Sunday was 3 days away. 3 days to prepare herself for whatever truth waited, whatever connection existed between her family's buried past and this powerful old man who looked at her like she was a ghost he'd been searching for all his life. At home, she found her mother awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a worried expression. Baby, you're home late. Long shift. Amara hung up her coat and joined her mother at the table. Mama, I need to ask you something. Teresa's hands tightened around her cup. What is it? The letters from Nana. The ones in Italian. Who were they from? Who sent them to her? The color drained from her mother's face. Why are you asking about this now? We agreed we'd leave that all behind. I need to know. Please. Amara, that history is old and painful and full of people who hurt our family. There's nothing good to be found there. Was one of them from a man named Alessandro Vitali? Teresa's sharp intake of breath was answer enough. The cup in her hands trembled, tea sloshing dangerously close to the rim. How do you know that name? Her voice was barely a whisper. Because I think I met him, Mama, and I think he's been looking for us for a very long time. The kitchen fell into heavy silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city outside their window. 2 women sat across from each other, separated by decades of silence and secrets, finally facing the moment when the past refused to stay buried any longer. The conversation at the kitchen table that night changed everything. Teresa Cole sat across from her daughter, tears streaming down her face as decades of carefully guarded secrets finally began to crumble. Amara listened in stunned silence as her mother spoke of things she'd never been allowed to know, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized was incomplete. The next 3 days passed in a blur of revelations and preparations. Teresa had finally opened the box of letters, and together they'd read through them late into the night. The handwriting was elegant but urgent, the Italian formal but emotional. Alessandro Vitali had written to Amara's grandmother, Maria, multiple times over the years. Letters asking for forgiveness. Letters expressing regret. Letters that went unanswered because Maria had moved, changed her name, disappeared into America's vastness with her young daughter and a determination to never be found. Now Sunday had arrived, and Amara stood outside the coffee shop on East 72nd Street, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was 15 minutes early, needing time to gather her courage. The morning had been difficult. Her mother's medical bills had arrived in the mail, each one a reminder of why this job mattered, why stability mattered, why getting tangled up in the complicated lives of billionaires was a terrible idea. But here she was anyway, because some questions demanded answers even when the answers might hurt. She dressed carefully in jeans and a simple sweater, nothing fancy. This wasn't a business meeting or a social call. This was something else entirely, something she didn't have words for yet. Her hair was down today instead of pulled back, and she wore the silver chain her mother had given her openly now, no longer hidden beneath her collar. At exactly 2 o'clock, a town car pulled up to the curb. Alessandro Vitali stepped out alone, as promised. He looked different in casual clothes, less intimidating somehow. He wore dark slacks and a cream-colored sweater, and his silver hair was slightly disheveled from the wind. He looked like what he was, an old man carrying the weight of a lifetime's worth of choices. Their eyes met through the coffee shop window. Amara took a deep breath and pushed through the door to meet him outside. "Miss Cole." His voice was gentle, respectful. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. Mr. Vitali." She used his birth name deliberately, watching his reaction. His eyes widened slightly, then softened with something that looked like relief. "Please call me Alessandro. And may I call you Amara?" "Yes, that's fine." They settled at a corner table inside, away from the other patrons. Alessandro ordered espresso. Amara ordered tea she didn't really want, just to have something to do with her hands. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unasked questions and unspoken truths. Finally, Alessandro broke it. "Your mother's maiden name. May I ask what it was?" Amara had known this question was coming, had prepared herself for it. "Vitali. Teresa Vitali." She changed it to Cole when she got married. Alessandro's cup rattled slightly against the saucer as he set it down. His hands trembled. "Teresa, Maria's daughter." "Yes. My grandmother was Maria Vitali before she came to America, before she became Maria Russo and tried to erase where she'd come from." "Maria." Alessandro whispered the name like a prayer, like a wound that had never healed. "She's gone now. Passed. 10 years ago. Cancer." Amara watched his face carefully, seeing genuine grief cross his weathered features. She never spoke about Sicily. "My mother said it was too painful, that there were people there who had hurt her, who had forced her to leave everything behind." She wasn't wrong. Alessandro's voice was rough with emotion. "The people who hurt her, who forced her away, they included me. Not directly, but through my silence, my cowardice. I was young, barely 22, and I let my family dictate my choices. I let them convince me that duty to the family name mattered more than." He stopped, struggling for composure. "More than what?" "More than love. More than the promises I made to a young woman from a modest family who had no political connections, no dowry, nothing my family considered valuable." Alessandro met her eyes directly now, his own shining with unshed tears. "I loved your grandmother, Amara, with everything I had. And when my family threatened to disown me, to ruin her family's small business, to make life impossible for everyone she cared about unless I left Sicily and married the woman that they'd chosen for me, I believed I had no choice. I believed their lies about protecting her by leaving." Amara felt something shift inside her chest, a tightness that made breathing difficult. This wasn't just history anymore. This was her grandmother's broken heart, her mother's hidden pain, the reason for all the silence and secrets that had shaped her entire life. "Did you know she was pregnant when you left?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended, but Alessandro didn't flinch from it. His face crumpled with a pain so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. "No, I swear to you, I didn't know. If I had known." His voice broke. "I received a letter from her, months after I'd left. It reached me in New York where my family had sent me to start over, to forget. She told me about Teresa, about how she was leaving Sicily because she couldn't stay, couldn't bear the shame or the questions or the pity. She told me she never wanted to see me again, that I'd made my choice and she'd made hers. And you just accepted that? You didn't try to find her." "I tried." Alessandro's hands clenched into fists on the table. "For years I tried. I hired investigators. I sent letters to every Italian community in America. I searched records and registries and church documents. But your grandmother was brilliant and determined. She disappeared completely. Changed her name, moved multiple times, left no trail for anyone to follow. And eventually, I had to accept that she didn't want to be found. That maybe the kindest thing I could do was respect that choice and leave her in peace." They sat in silence again, both processing the weight of this conversation. Around them, The coffee shop hummed with ordinary Sunday afternoon activity. People laughed, typing on laptops, reading newspapers, living lives uncomplicated by decades-old secrets and blood ties that reached across oceans. My mother said you wrote letters, Amara said finally. Multiple letters over the years. We read them. This week for the first time. Did she keep them? Alessandro's voice was barely audible. Yes. In a box she never opened, but never threw away either. Letters asking for forgiveness. Letters saying you'd built a fortune and wanted to share it with her, with your daughter. Letters that went unanswered because she'd moved and you didn't know where to send them anymore. I never stopped thinking about them. About her. Alessandro looked out the window, his profile sharp against the afternoon light. I married the woman my family chose. I built the business they demanded. I became everything they wanted me to be. And I was miserable every single day because I knew what I'd sacrificed to get there. When my wife passed 15 years ago, I thought perhaps I could finally make things right, finally find Maria and apologize properly. But by then, he trailed off. By then she was sick, and she'd spent her whole life teaching my mother to hide, to stay invisible, to never let anyone from that old world find them. Yes. Alessandro turned back to her, and the depth of regret in his eyes was almost too much to bear. Amara, I need you to understand something. I'm not here to claim you as family or to force some kind of relationship you don't want. I'm not here to ease my guilty conscience or to play the role of repentant grandfather in my twilight years. I'm here because when I heard you speak in that dialect in exactly the way Maria used to speak, I knew that somehow, impossibly, a piece of what I'd lost had found its way back to me. And I couldn't let that chance pass without at least knowing the truth. The truth. Amara tested the word, finding it both frightening and necessary. What exactly is the truth, Alessandro? That you're my grandfather? That your son Daniel is my mother's half-brother? That we're all connected through your mistakes and my grandmother's heartbreak? Yes, all of that. He didn't look away from her direct gaze. But also this, you owe me nothing. Your mother owes me nothing. I abandoned Maria when she needed me most, and no amount of regret or wealth or good intentions can change that. If you want to walk away from his table and never speak to me again, I'll respect that completely. Amara studied his face, seeing the sincerity there, the absence of manipulation or expectation. This was what her mother had feared, not a villain trying to control them, but a broken old man carrying guilt that had never healed. And somehow that was both better and worse than what she'd imagined. I need time, she said slowly. This is a lot to process. My mother is terrified right now, worried that letting you into our lives will somehow hurt us the way your family hurt her mother. I can't make decisions about this without considering how it affects her. Of course. Take all the time you need. Alessandro reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple business card with just his name and a phone number. This reaches me directly. No assistants, no intermediaries. If you ever want to talk, or if your mother wants to talk, or if you simply want to tell me to stay away, call that number. I'll answer. Amara took the card, slipping it into her jacket pocket. Can I ask you something else? Anything. Daniel doesn't know all of this yet, does he? About my grandmother, about the real connection. Alessandro shook his head. I told him I'd made mistakes in Sicily, that I'd left people behind. But I didn't tell him the complete truth. I wanted to speak with you first, to understand what you wanted before I involved him in something that might cause you pain or unwanted attention. He's your son. He has a right to know he has family he never knew existed. He does. But you also have a right to privacy, to decide how and when this information becomes known. If you want to keep this quiet, I'll respect that. If you want Daniel to know, I'll tell him everything. Alessandro paused. What do you want, Amara? It was such a simple question with such a complicated answer. What did she want? To go back to being invisible, to pretend this conversation had never happened, to embrace this connection and all the complications it would bring, to protect her mother from more pain, while also honoring the truth that had finally come to light? I don't know yet, she admitted. But I think I want to understand more. About your village, about my grandmother's life there, about the family that drove her away. I want to know the whole story before I decide what to do with it. Alessandro nodded slowly. I can tell you everything. It won't be comfortable, and parts of it will make you angry at me, but I won't hide anything anymore. The lies and the silence have done enough damage. They talked for another hour, Alessandro sharing stories about the small Sicilian village where he and Maria had grown up. He described narrow cobblestone streets and houses built into hillsides, the Mediterranean stretching blue and endless beyond the cliffs. He told her about Maria's laugh, her stubborn pride, the way she'd challenge him on everything and make him think harder about the world beyond their small corner of it. She was extraordinary, he said softly, smart and fierce, and completely unwilling to accept the limitations people try to place on her because she was a woman from a poor family. That's what made my family hate her, not her lack of money or connections, but her refusal to be diminished by their expectations. Amara felt tears prick her eyes, recognizing her grandmother in that description, seeing echoes of the woman in the old photographs her mother had kept. I wish I'd known her better. I was only 14 when she died, and she was already sick by then. She never talked about Sicily, never taught me the language properly. My mother said it was because the memories were too painful. They were. For both of us. Alessandro's voice was heavy with old sorrow. But that doesn't mean they should have been forgotten entirely. Culture, language, history, they matter. They're part of who we are. And Maria letting that die with her, that was another loss I caused, another thing taken from her and from you. The weight of his regret was palpable, filling the space between them. Amara realized this man had spent 50 years carrying this guilt, building an empire on a foundation of sacrifice he'd never truly accepted. Whatever else he was, powerful, wealthy, feared in business, he was also fundamentally broken by the choice he'd made as a young man. I should go, she said finally, checking her phone and seeing messages from her mother asking if she was okay. But I'll call you. Soon. There's more I need to know, and I think my mother needs to hear some of this too. From you directly. Alessandro stood when she did, his movements slower than they'd been at the gala, as if this conversation had aged him further. Thank you, Amara, for listening, for being willing to hear the truth even when it's painful. You're very much like your grandmother in that way. It was meant as a compliment, but it landed with complicated weight. Amara nodded, unsure how to respond, and left the coffee shop with her mind spinning and her heart heavy with knowledge she couldn't unknow. The next few days were surreal. Amara went through her normal routines, worked shifts, classes, caring for her mother. But everything felt different now, colored by the truth she carried. She and Teresa talked late into the night, her mother sharing memories she'd kept locked away for decades. Stories about growing up knowing she was different, knowing her mother carried some deep wound that couldn't be discussed. The shame Maria had felt, the determination to build a new life where the past couldn't touch them. She made me promise, Teresa said one night, her voice thick with emotion. When I was 16 and starting to ask questions about my father, she made me promise to never look for him, to never try to understand what happened in Sicily. She said some doors, once opened, could never be closed again, and that what was behind them would only bring pain. But you kept his letters, Amara pointed out. The ones he sent to her. You kept them all these years. I did, because even though Mama wanted to forget, I couldn't. He was my father, and I needed to know that he'd at least tried, that he'd care enough to search, even if he never found us. Teresa wiped her eyes. And now he's found us. Found you. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse. Maybe it's both, Amara said softly. Maybe it could be both. Meanwhile, her work life had become increasingly complicated. The gossip from the gala had died down somewhat, but there was still tension among the staff. Some treated her differently now, with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Others seemed to resent what they saw as special attention from wealthy clients. At her next catering event, a smaller dinner party at a corporate office, Marcus pulled her aside during setup. People are still talking, saying you've got some kind of connection to the Whitmore family, that the old man is paying you off or something. That's not true. I'm not getting anything from anyone. I believe you. But you should know the event coordinator has been asking questions about you. Your background, how long you've worked for the company, if you've ever had complaints. It feels like they're building a case to let you go. Amara's stomach dropped. Why would they do that? Marcus shrugged uncomfortably. Rich people don't like complications. And you've become a complication, whether you meant to or not. Just watch yourself. That evening, exhausted and worried, Amara found herself calling the number on Alessandro's card. He answered on the second ring. Amara, I hope you would call. I have questions. About what happens now, about Daniel, about... She paused, struggling with vulnerability. I'm having problems at work. People think there's something inappropriate going on, and I might lose my job because of it, because of the attention from a gala. There was a long silence on the other end. When Alessandro spoke again, his voice was tight with anger, not at her, but at the situation. That's unacceptable. You've done nothing wrong. I'll speak to Daniel immediately. No, please don't. That would only make it worse, make it seem like I really do have special protection. I needed to tell someone who would understand why this matters. I can't afford to lose this job. My mother's medical bills are no longer your burden to carry alone. Alessandro's tone shifted, became both gentler and more firm. Amara, listen to me. I cannot change the past. I cannot undo the harm my choices caused your grandmother or your mother. But I can help with this. Please, let me help with this. I don't want your money. That's not why I agreed to meet you. I know. You've made that abundantly clear. It's another way you remind me of Maria. She was fiercely independent too. Hated accepting help from anyone. His voice softened further. But pride shouldn't mean suffering. Let me at least cover your mother's medical expenses. Not as payment or obligation, but as something I should have been doing all along if I'd known she existed. Amara wanted to refuse. Every instinct her mother had instilled in her said to maintain distance, to never be indebted to people with power and wealth. But she was so tired. Tired of juggling multiple jobs, tired of the fear that came with every medical bill, tired of watching her mother suffer because they couldn't afford better care. I need to think about it, she said finally, and I need to talk to my mother. This affects her too. Of course. But Amara, know this, whether you accept help or not, I'm going to tell Daniel the truth. Soon. He deserves to know he has family beyond what he thought existed. And frankly, he needs to know so he can protect you better at work and in public if this becomes more widely known. The thought of it becoming widely known made Amara's chest tighten with anxiety. What if I don't want it known? What if my mother and I prefer to keep living our lives without being defined by this connection? Then that's what will happen. Daniel, and I will respect your wishes completely. But the reality is, the truth has a way of coming out regardless of what we want. Better to control the narrative than to let others do it for us. They talked for another 20 minutes, discussing possibilities and fears, testing the boundaries of this new relationship they were building. By the time they hung up, Amara felt both more grounded and more uncertain than before. 2 days later, she received a text from Daniel Whitmore requesting a meeting. Her heart raced as she read it. My father has shared some information with me that I think we should discuss. No pressure and absolutely no employment concerns. But I'd like to understand the situation better from your perspective. Coffee sometime this week. She agreed to meet him Thursday afternoon at the same coffee shop where she'd met Alessandro. When she arrived, Daniel was already there, looking less polished than usual, his tie loosened and his expression thoughtful rather than guarded. Thank you for meeting me, he said as she sat down. I imagine this week has been overwhelming. That's an understatement. Daniel smiled slightly. My father told me everything. About your grandmother, about their relationship, about how he abandoned her when she was pregnant with your mother, about how he spent 50 years regretting that choice. He paused, studying her face. He also told me that makes you my niece, I suppose. though that feels like an inadequate word for something this complicated. It is complicated. Amara wrapped her hand around her coffee cup, grateful for the warmth. I don't know what you want me to say. I'm not trying to insert myself into your family or make claims on anything. I was just working at an event, and this all spiraled beyond my control. I know, and I'm not here to make this more difficult for you. Honestly, I'm trying to figure out how to make it easier. Daniel leaned forward, his expression earnest. My relationship with my father has been strained for years. We're distant, formal, more like business associates than family. But this past week, since he met you, something has shifted in him. He's more present, more emotional, more like an actual human being than I've seen him in decades. I'm not responsible for fixing your relationship with your father, Amara said carefully. That's between you two. You're absolutely right. But I'm realizing that maybe the reason our relationship was so broken is because he's been carrying this guilt and regret his entire life, and it poisoned everything else. He couldn't be a good father to me because he was too consumed with being a terrible father to your mother. Daniel shook his head. That's not fair to either of us, to you or to me. We both deserve better than we got from him. The observation struck Amara deeply. This recognition that Alessandro's choices had created multiple victims across generations. What do you want from me, Daniel? Honestly, I'd like to get to know you. As family, if you're comfortable with that. But also as yourself, separate from all this drama. My father described your grandmother as extraordinary, and from what I've seen of you, that seems to have been passed down. He smiled genuinely. And selfishly, I've never had extended family beyond my father. The idea that I have a half-sister, a niece, maybe other relatives through your mother's side, that's something I never expected to have. Your father mentioned a wife. Did you have children? No. My marriage ended years ago, partly because I threw myself into work to avoid dealing with family issues. Another thing I inherited from my father, apparently. Daniel's expression turned rueful. I'm 43 years old, running a billion-dollar company, and I just discovered I'm not as alone in the world as I thought I was. That matters to me more than I would have expected. They talked for over an hour, slowly moving past the awkwardness into something more genuine. Daniel shared stories about growing up with Alessandro as a father, the pressure and expectations, the coldness that came from a man who couldn't fully engage emotionally because he was locked in his own past. Amara shared pieces of her life. Her mother's strength, her grandmother's determination to build something new in America, the struggles of working multiple jobs while trying to build toward a better future. You're a linguistics student? Daniel asked, seeming genuinely interested. Just community college classes right now. I want to eventually get a degree, maybe work as a translator or teach. Languages have always fascinated me, the way they carry culture and history. Like the Sicilian dialect you spoke at the gala. Yes, like that. Amara smiled slightly, though I never imagined that particular skill would lead to all this. Life is strange that way. One moment, one choice, one phrase spoken, and everything changes. Daniel paused thoughtfully. Amara, I want you to know that regardless of what you decide about having a relationship with my father or with me, you have my support. If you're having problems at work because of this situation, I'll handle it. If you need anything to help your mother, to help yourself, you just have to ask. I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's family. And family takes care of each other, even when the relationships are complicated and new and sometimes uncomfortable. He met her eyes directly. My father failed your grandmother and your mother. I can't change that, but I can make sure he doesn't fail you too, even if that means standing between you and his need to make amends. Your autonomy and your choices come first. Amara felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying. Thank you. That means more than you know. They parted with a tentative plan to meet again, this time with Teresa included if she was willing. Daniel promised to handle the work situation discreetly, and Amara promised to consider allowing Alessandro to help with medical expenses, though she still hadn't made a final decision. That evening, she sat with her mother in their small living room, the box of letters open between them on the coffee table. "Daniel wants to meet you," Amara said softly. "He wants to know his sister, even though you've never met, even though 50 years separates you." Teresa was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing the edge of one of Alessandro's old letters. "Your grandmother would have hated all of this. The attention, the connection to that world she ran from. She wanted us safe and invisible." "I know. But Mama, we're not invisible anymore. And maybe that's okay. Maybe safety isn't the same as hiding." Amara took her mother's hand gently. "Alessandro is your father. Daniel is your brother. That's the truth, whether we acknowledge it or not. And I think I want to know them, not because of money or status or anything they can give us, but because they're family, and we've both spent our whole lives without that." Teresa's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure, baby? Once we open this door—" "I know. We can't close it again. Mama told you that, and she was right. But maybe some doors are meant to be opened. Maybe the courage isn't in hiding, but in facing what's on the other side and choosing how we want to move forward." They sat together in the quiet of their small apartment, surrounded by the evidence of lives lived in the margins, always careful, always guarded. But something was shifting now, some old fear finally loosening its grip. The past had found them despite all their precautions. Now, they had to decide what to do with it, how to weave this new truth into the fabric of who they were and who they wanted to become. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy, millions of people living interconnected lives, separated and bound together by choices and chances and moments that changed everything. Amara looked at her mother, saw the fear and the hope warring in her expression, and made a decision. "Let's meet them together. You, me, Alessandro, and Daniel. Let's sit down as family and figure out what that means for all of us." Teresa nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. Okay, we'll try." And in that moment, decades of silence finally, tentatively, began to break. The family meeting had been scheduled for Sunday afternoon at Daniel's private penthouse, rather than a public space. Amara and Teresa arrived together, both nervous despite Daniel's assurances that this would be low-key and comfortable. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless, and Teresa gripped her daughter's hand tightly the entire way. When the doors opened, Daniel himself was waiting in the foyer to greet them. He dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, clearly trying to make the atmosphere less formal. His smile was warm but uncertain, as if he too was navigating unfamiliar territory. "Teresa, Amara, thank you for coming." He stepped forward, then hesitated, unsure of the appropriate greeting. "I'm Daniel. Your brother, I suppose." Teresa stared at him for a long moment, taking in the features that were so different from her own, yet somehow familiar in the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. "Half-brother," she said softly. "We share a father, but not much else." "Not yet," Daniel agreed. "But maybe that could change." He led them into a spacious living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Alessandro stood by the windows, backlit by afternoon sun, his posture rigid with tension. When he turned and saw Teresa, his composure crumbled completely. For a long moment, father and daughter simply stared at each other across the elegant room. Alessandro's eyes filled with tears that he didn't try to hide. Teresa's expression was harder to read, a complex mixture of curiosity, anger, and something that might have been longing. "You look like her," Alessandro finally said, his voice breaking. "So much like Maria. The way you stand, the way you're looking at me right now, like you're trying to decide if I'm worth your time. That's exactly how she used to look at me." "I'm nothing like my mother," Teresa replied, but there was no heat in the words. She was strong enough to leave everything behind and start over. "I'm not sure I could have done that. You did do that. You changed your name, built a life, raised a daughter on your own after your husband passed. Maria would have been so proud of you." The mention of her mother seemed to crack something in Teresa's careful control. Her eyes glistened with tears. Don't talk about what she would have been proud of. You don't get to speak for her. You weren't there. You're right. I wasn't. Alessandro took a tentative step closer, but didn't try to approach further. And I will spend whatever time I've left knowing that I failed her, failed you, failed to be the man either of you deserved. Amara watched this exchange, feeling like an intruder in a moment that belonged to these two people and their complicated history. Daniel seemed to feel the same way, standing quietly to the side, letting them have this space. Why now? Teresa asked, her voice shaking. After 50 years, why do you suddenly care? Is it guilt? Mortality? Are you trying to buy your way into heaven before you die? Maybe all of those things, Alessandro admitted. But mostly it's because I never stopped caring, and when I heard your daughter speak in the dialect Maria taught her, I knew I'd been given a chance I didn't deserve. A chance to at least tell the truth, even if nothing else can be repaired. Teresa crossed to the sofa and sat down heavily, as if her legs couldn't support her anymore. Amara moved to sit beside her, offering silent support. Daniel quietly brought water glasses for everyone, then settled into a chair, giving them space but remaining present. Tell me about her, Teresa said finally. Tell me about my mother before she had to run away, before you broke her heart and destroyed her life. Alessandro winced at the harsh words, but didn't dispute them. He sat down across from them and began to speak, his voice heavy with memory and regret. He told them about Maria Russo, born to a family of fishermen in a small coastal village in western Sicily. She'd been beautiful and fierce, with a mind too sharp for the limited opportunities available to women in that place and time. Alessandro had fallen in love with her when they were both 16, despite the fact that his family was wealthy landowners and hers were laborers. We met in secret for 3 years, he said softly. In the olive groves above the village, by the sea cliffs, anywhere we could be alone. She challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. She read books she borrowed from the village priest and taught herself English from old newspapers. She dreamed of going to university, of becoming a teacher, things that girls from her background simply didn't do. What happened? Teresa asked, though she clearly knew parts of this story already. My family found out. They were furious. They said Maria was beneath us, that she was trying to trap me for our money, that any children we had would be tainted by her low birth. Alessandro's hands clenched into fists. I was 22, and I believed I could fight them. I proposed to Maria in secret, promised her we'd run away together, start fresh somewhere they couldn't control us. But you didn't run away, Teresa said flatly. No, my father and uncles came to me with threats. They said if I married Maria, they would destroy her family's fishing business, make sure her father couldn't work, drive them out of the village entirely. They said they'd arranged a marriage for me with a woman from a powerful family in Palermo, and if I refused, I would be disowned completely. No money, no future, nothing. So you chose money over love. The contempt in Teresa's voice was clear. I chose what I thought was protection for her, Alessandro corrected gently. They convinced me that if I left Sicily, married the woman they'd chosen, that they would leave Maria and her family alone. They promised that if I cooperated, her father could keep his boats, her brothers could keep their work, and she could live her life in peace. I believed them. I was young and stupid, and I believed that my sacrifice would at least keep her safe. But it didn't, Amara said quietly. No, because I didn't know she was pregnant. She didn't tell me before I left because she thought it would make me stay out of obligation rather than love, and she didn't want that. By the time she sent word to me in New York, I was already married, already trapped in the life my family had designed. Alessandro's voice broke again. She told me about the baby, about you, Teresa, and she said she was leaving Sicily because she couldn't bear to stay. She said the village knew she'd been with me, that she was facing shame and judgment, and that my family had started spreading rumors that she'd been with multiple men, trying to destroy her reputation entirely. Teresa's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the suddenly quiet room. They tried to destroy her. Yes, even after I'd done everything they asked, they still couldn't let her exist as a reminder of my disobedience. So she left. She took what little money she'd saved, bought passage to New York, and disappeared into the immigrant communities there. And Alessandro trailed off, staring at his hands. I tried to find her. For years I tried, but she was brilliant and determined, and she didn't want to be found. She changed her name twice, Teresa said. Once when she arrived in New York, and again when we moved to Philadelphia when I was 8. She was always looking over her shoulder, always worried that someone from the old life would find us and bring trouble. I never wanted to bring her trouble. I only wanted to apologize, to help, to do something to make up for what I'd done. You can't make up for it. Teresa's words were hard but not cruel, simply honest. You can't give her back the life she should have had, the education she wanted, the love she deserved. She worked herself to death in factory jobs and cleaning houses, always struggling, always afraid. And she did it alone because of your choices. The silence that followed was heavy with grief and truth. Daniel finally spoke, his voice careful. I don't think any of us can change what happened, but we can decide what happens now, how we move forward from here. Can we? Teresa looked at her half-brother with something like skepticism. You're a billionaire. Amara and I are barely getting by. Your father abandoned my mother, but built an empire. What exactly is there to move forward to? What kind of family can we possibly be when the foundation is made of such different lives? A complicated one, Daniel said simply. But maybe that's okay. Maybe family doesn't have to be perfect to be real. Amara felt her mother's hand grip hers tightly. She could sense Teresa wavering between the anger she'd carried for her entire life and the possibility of something different, something that might offer connection instead of isolation. I need time, Teresa finally said. I need to process all of this. But I will say this. She looked directly at Alessandro. I don't forgive you. Not yet, and maybe not ever. But I'm willing to hear what you have to say, to let you know your granddaughter, to see if there's anything worth building here. That's all I can offer right now. That's more than I deserve, Alessandro said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Teresa. Truly. They talked for another hour, carefully navigating around the deepest wounds, sharing small pieces of their lives. Teresa told Alessandro about her late husband, about raising Amara alone after he died, about her mother's final years when sickness had stolen her strength, but not her dignity. Alessandro shared memories of Maria from their youth, stories that made Teresa both laugh and cry, seeing her mother as a young woman full of dreams and fire. When they finally left the penthouse, both Amara and Teresa were emotionally exhausted, but somehow lighter, as if acknowledging the truth had released some of the pressure they'd been carrying. On the cab ride home, Teresa was quiet, staring out the window at the city passing by. Are you okay, Mama? Amara asked gently. I don't know. I met my father today. My father, who I've spent 52 years being angry at without ever seeing his face. And he's just... Teresa shook her head. He's just a sad old man who made terrible choices and has to live with them. I wanted him to be a monster. Monsters are easier to hate. He's not a monster, but he's not a hero either. He's just human. Yeah, that's the hard part. The following week brought unexpected complications. Someone, somewhere, had leaked information about the Whitmore family's newly discovered connection to Amara and Teresa. The story hit social media first, then gossip blogs, then actual news outlets picked it up. Billionaire's secret family discovered read one headline. Hidden granddaughter working as waitress in NYC proclaimed another. Photos of Amara from the charity gala were dredged up and circulated, along with speculation about Alessandro's mysterious past and the dramatic revelation at the event. Amara's phone exploded with messages and friend requests from people she'd never met. Reporters showed up at the diner where she worked, at her apartment building, even tried to follow her to her evening classes. The catering company received dozens of calls asking about her, and the event coordinator finally called her in for a meeting. "I'm sorry, Amara, but we have to let you go," the woman said, not quite meeting her eyes. "The attention is too much. Clients are worried about privacy, about their events becoming media circuses. It's nothing personal, but we can't have this kind of disruption." Amara felt the bottom drop out of her world. She'd expected problems, but losing her primary source of income was devastating. "Please, I need this job. I'll stay out of sight, work in the kitchen, whatever you need. The decision is final. You'll receive 2 weeks severance, but we need you to return your uniform and ID today." She left the office in a daze, her mind racing with panic. The diner job alone wouldn't cover rent and her mother's medical expenses. Her carefully balanced life was collapsing, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. When she got home, she found Teresa surrounded by similar chaos. A reporter had somehow gotten their home phone number and was calling repeatedly. Neighbors who'd never spoken to them before were suddenly trying to be friendly, clearly hoping for gossip or inside information. "This is a nightmare," Teresa said, her face pale with stress. "Your grandmother spent her whole life staying invisible, and now we're front-page news." Amara's phone rang. It was Daniel. "I just saw the headlines," he said without preamble. "Are you okay? Is your mother safe? I lost my job. There are reporters everywhere. I don't know what to do. Come to my building. Both of you. I have security here. They can keep the press out. You can stay in one of the guest apartments until this settles down. I can't just run away. I have rent to pay, bills to handle. Amara, listen to me. This situation is dangerous. These people are invasive, and they don't care about your privacy or safety. Let me help. Please." Amara wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence and handle this on her own. But she looked at her mother's frightened face, heard another knock on the door from someone probably wanting a quote or a photo, and made a decision. "Okay, we'll come, but just until this calms down." Within 2 hours, Daniel had sent a car to collect them from a back entrance of their building. They arrived at his residence with only hastily packed bags, feeling displaced and overwhelmed. Alessandro was waiting with Daniel when they arrived. His expression was furious in a way they hadn't seen before. "I will find out who leaked this information," he said darkly, "and they will regret it. I promise you that." "It doesn't matter who leaked it," Amara said tiredly. "It's out now. We have to deal with it." "My father's right, though," Daniel added. "This leak was deliberate, probably designed to destabilize either my company or our family. Someone is using you as a weapon, and that's not acceptable." Teresa sank onto a sofa, looking smaller and more fragile than Amara had ever seen her. "I need to call my doctor, reschedule my appointments. I don't even know how I'm supposed to." She stopped mid-sentence, her breathing suddenly labored. Her hand went to her chest, her face twisting in pain. "Manga." Amara rushed to her side as Teresa gasped for air. Alessandro was already calling 911 while Daniel grabbed his keys. "I'm driving her to the hospital. It'll be faster than waiting for an ambulance." The next few hours were a blur of emergency rooms and worried waiting. The doctors eventually determined that Teresa had experienced a severe panic attack complicated by her existing heart condition. She needed rest, medication adjustments, and absolutely no stress. A prescription that seemed impossible given the current circumstances. While Teresa slept in the hospital bed, sedated and finally peaceful, Amara sat in the uncomfortable waiting room chair with her head in her hands. Alessandro and Daniel sat nearby, both visibly shaken by the emergency. "This is my fault," Alessandro said quietly. "If I'd never approached you at that gala, if I'd left the past buried, then we'd still be living in the dark, and Mama would still be carrying all that unresolved pain." Amara interrupted. "This isn't your fault. It's the fault of whoever leaked our story and the media vultures who won't leave us alone." I've hired private security for both of you, Daniel said. And I'm releasing a statement tomorrow, making it clear that any harassment of you or your mother will be met with legal action. That'll just make it worse. Make it seem like we're part of your world, like we need protecting because we matter to the Whitmore fortune. You do matter, Daniel said firmly. Not because of the fortune, but because you're family. And I protect my family. It was the first time he'd claimed them so directly, so unequivocally. Despite everything, Amara felt something warm bloom in her chest. The unfamiliar sensation of being defended, of having someone with power and resources standing between her and harm. A doctor emerged from Teresa's room. She's stable and resting. We like to keep her overnight for observation, but she should be fine to go home tomorrow. However, I need to stress that she must avoid high-stress situations. Her heart condition is manageable, but not if she's constantly anxious or frightened. After the doctor left, Alessandro stood and walked to the window overlooking the hospital parking lot. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with determination. I'm going to make a public statement. I'll take full responsibility for the past, explain what happened with Maria, and make it absolutely clear that Teresa and Amara owe me nothing and want only to be left in peace. I'll redirect all the attention onto me where it belongs. That won't work, Amara said. The media won't lose interest just because you tell them to. They'll dig deeper, make it worse. Then what do you suggest? Alessandro turned to face her, and she saw genuine desperation in his eyes. I cannot stand by while you and your mother suffer because of my past mistakes. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it. Amara thought for a long moment, considering their options. Finally, she spoke. We face it together. Not hiding, not running, but controlling our own narrative. We give one interview, tell the true story on our terms, and then we make it clear that's all the public gets. After that, our lives are private again. That's asking a lot of you, Daniel said carefully. Going public, sharing something so personal. The alternative is letting them make up their own version of events. At least this way, we tell the truth. My grandmother's story deserves to be told with dignity, not turned into tabloid fodder. Alessandro and Daniel exchanged glances. Finally, Alessandro nodded. If you're willing to do this, I'll support you completely, but only if your mother agrees as well. This is her story more than anyone's. When Teresa woke an hour later, they presented the plan to her. She listened quietly, her face pale, but her eyes clearer than they'd been in days. My mother would have hated this, she said finally. She'd have been horrified at the idea of our family history becoming public knowledge. But you know what? She's gone, and I'm tired of living in her fear. If we're going to do this, we do it right. We honor her memory by telling the truth, and then we reclaim our right to privacy. They scheduled an exclusive interview with a respected journalist known for sensitive family stories rather than sensationalism. The interview would take place at Daniel's penthouse in 2 days, giving them time to prepare and for Teresa to recover her strength. That night, while Teresa slept in the hospital and Alessandro had gone home, Amara and Daniel sat together in the waiting room, both too wired to sleep despite the late hour. I never imagined my life would look like this, Amara said quietly. A month ago, I was invisible. Now I'm at the center of a media storm, staying in a billionaire's penthouse, planning press interviews about family secrets. A month ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was and what my family consisted of, Daniel replied. Turns out I was wrong about both. Family is more complicated and more valuable than I ever gave it credit for. Are you scared? About the interview, about what happens after? Terrified, Daniel admitted, but also strangely hopeful. This is the first time in years that my father and I have actually worked together towards something meaningful instead of just arguing about business decisions. That matters, even in the middle of all this chaos. Amara studied his face, seeing the sincerity there, the genuine care for people he'd only known a few weeks. Thank you for protecting us, for not treating this like just another problem to manage. You're not a problem, Amara. Your family. And I'm learning that sometimes family means stepping up even when it's complicated and messy and nothing like what you planned for. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people from completely different worlds finding unexpected common ground in shared crisis and tentative connection. The next morning, Teresa was discharged with a prescription for new medication and strict orders to rest. They returned to Daniel's building, where a guest apartment had been prepared for them. It was larger than their entire home apartment, with a full kitchen, two bedrooms, and a living room filled with sunlight. "I can't get used to this," Teresa said, looking around with a mixture of awe and discomfort. "All this space, all this luxury. It's not real life. It's real for now," Amara said gently, "and we need it while we figure out what comes next." Over the next 2 days, they prepared for the interview with help from Daniel's public relations team. They decided what parts of the story to share, what to keep private, how to frame the narrative in a way that honored Maria's memory while protecting their own dignity. Alessandro spent hours with Teresa, sharing stories about her mother that she'd never heard, showing her old photographs he'd kept for decades. Slowly, carefully, they began to build something between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement, understanding, the fragile beginnings of connection. On the morning of the interview, Amara stood in front of the mirror in her borrowed bedroom, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd chosen simple clothes, nothing flashy or expensive, wanting to appear as herself rather than some version of herself designed for cameras. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus, her former co-worker. Saw the news. "Hope you're okay. You didn't deserve to lose your job over this." The kindness in the message nearly broke her composure. She realized that in the middle of all this drama with the Whitmore family, she'd lost sight of her own life, her own goals, her own identity separate from this complicated history. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Alessandro stood in the hallway, looking nervous despite his expensive suit and decades of business experience. "I wanted to say something before we do this," he said quietly. "Whatever happens today, whatever the public reaction is, I want you to know that meeting you and your mother has been the greatest gift of my life. Not because it eases my guilt or gives me redemption I don't deserve, but because it's given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Family that I can actually care about without the coldness and calculation that define my relationship with my own parents." Amara felt tears prick her eyes. "We're still figuring this out. All of us. It's not going to be simple or easy. The best things never are." Alessandro smiled slightly. "Your grandmother taught me that, though I was too young and stupid to listen at the time. I'm listening now." The journalist arrived right on schedule, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. She set up her recording equipment while the family gathered in Daniel's living room. Alessandro and Teresa sitting together on one sofa, Amara and Daniel on another, a visible representation of families old and new, broken and rebuilding. As the interview began, Amara took a deep breath and prepared to share their truth with the world. Whatever came next, they would face it together. This strange, complicated, imperfect family that had found each other against all odds and despite decades of silence. The story was finally being told, and with it, perhaps, the chance for real healing could begin. The interview went better than any of them had expected. The journalists listened with genuine empathy as they shared their story. Alessandro's youthful mistakes, Maria's strength in starting over, Teresa's life shaped by secrets, and Amara's accidental discovery that changed everything. When the piece published 2 days later, the response was overwhelmingly supportive rather than sensational. "This isn't a scandal," one prominent commentator wrote. "It's a reminder that powerful people are human, that mistakes have consequences, and that it's never too late to try to make things right." The media frenzy began to die down almost immediately. Amara's public statement at the end of the interview had been clear and firm. "We're grateful to know the truth about our family history, but we're not seeking wealth or status. We simply want to live our lives with dignity and privacy. This is all we'll be sharing publicly. Something about her quiet strength and obvious sincerity resonated with people. The invasive reporters backed off. The gossip blogs moved on to other stories. Within a week, Amara and Teresa were able to return to some semblance of normal life, though everything had fundamentally changed. The shift in Alessandro and Daniel's relationship was the most remarkable transformation. The interview had forced them to sit together, present a united front, and actually communicate honestly for the first time in years. The wall of coldness that had existed between them for decades had started to crack. One evening, a week after the interview, Daniel invited everyone to dinner at his penthouse. Not a formal affair, but something simple and intimate. Alessandro arrived early and found his son in the kitchen, actually cooking rather than ordering catering. "You're making pasta?" Alessandro asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Trying to. I found Nonna Maria's recipe in one of the letters. Thought it might be nice to honor her this way." Daniel looked up from the pot he was stirring. "You could help if you want. You probably know more about Sicilian cooking than I do." Alessandro felt emotion tighten his throat. "I haven't cooked traditional food in years. After I left Sicily, I try to forget everything about that life." "Maybe it's time to remember the good parts," Daniel said quietly. "Not everything from the past has to be painful." They worked together in the kitchen, Alessandro guiding Daniel through the steps of making pasta alla norma, one of Maria's favorites. It was awkward at first, neither quite sure how to navigate this new dynamic, but slowly they fell into an easier rhythm. "I was a terrible father to you," Alessandro said suddenly, not looking up from the eggplant he was slicing. "Cold and distant and impossible to please." "I'm sorry for that, Daniel. You deserve better." Daniel paused in his stirring. "I spent a lot of my life being angry at you for that. But I'm starting to understand that you couldn't give me something you didn't have yourself. Your own father was harsh and controlling, and you never learned how to be different. That's not an excuse. No, but it's an explanation. And I'm realizing that understanding why someone hurt you doesn't mean you have to keep hurting yourself over it." Daniel finally looked at his father. "I'm willing to try building something better between us. If you are, I am. More than anything." Alessandro's voice was thick with emotion. "Meeting Teresa and Amara, facing what I did to Maria, it's made me realize how much time I've wasted being the person my father wanted me to be instead of the person I should have been." When Amara and Teresa arrived an hour later, they found father and son working together in the kitchen, actually laughing over a cooking mishap. The sight stopped both women in their tracks. "Is this real?" Teresa whispered to her daughter. "Are we in some alternate universe?" "I think we're in a new one," Amara whispered back. "One where things can actually get better." Dinner was simple, but perfect. They sat around Daniel's dining table, eating the pasta Alessandro and Daniel had made, sharing stories and memories. Teresa told them about her late husband, about raising Amara alone, about the small moments of joy that had sustained her through hard times. Alessandro shared more stories about Maria's wit and intelligence, painting a picture of a woman who had been so much more than just a victim of circumstance. "She would have loved seeing this," Teresa said softly, looking around the table at her father, her half-brother, and her daughter. "All of us together, finally connected. She would have been angry at you still, Alessandro, make no mistake. But she would have been glad we found each other." "I hope so," Alessandro replied. "I hope somewhere she knows that her strength, her determination to build a new life, it mattered. It created something beautiful." After dinner, they moved to the living room. Daniel brought out a folder he'd been working on. "I've been thinking about what we discussed," he said, looking at Amara. "About honoring Nonna Maria's memory in a meaningful way. I'd like to propose something." He opened the folder to reveal plans for a scholarship fund, the Maria Vitali Memorial Scholarship, designed to help first-generation immigrant students pursue degrees in education and linguistics, the dreams Maria herself had never been able to fulfill. The initial endowment would be substantial enough to support at least 20 students per year, Daniel explained. And I was hoping, Amara, that once you finish your degree, you might want to help administer it. Your background in linguistics and your understanding of what these students face would be invaluable. Amara stared at the papers, tears streaming down her face. This is beautiful. She would have loved this so much. We could also create a cultural preservation component, Alessandro added quietly. Recording dialects and languages that are disappearing, creating archives for immigrant communities, keeping alive the kinds of cultural connections that almost disappeared from our own family. Teresa reached over and took Alessandro's hand, the first time she'd initiated physical contact with him. Thank you, both of you, for making something good come from all this pain. The corporate crisis that had been brewing in the background finally resolved itself the following week. The rival who had leaked the family story hoping to destabilize Daniel's company had miscalculated badly. Instead of weakness, the public had seen authenticity and humanity. Daniel's approval ratings among investors actually increased, and the attempted takeover collapsed when key board members rallied behind him. Turns out people respect a CEO who handles personal crisis with dignity, Daniel told Amara during one of their now regular coffee meetings. Who knew that being human could actually be good for business? Revolutionary concept, Amara teased. Maybe you should write a book about it. Their relationship had evolved into something comfortable and genuine. He was her uncle, yes, but also a friend and mentor. He connected her with colleagues in the linguistics field, helped her transfer to a better university program, and treated her like family without making her feel indebted. Teresa's health had stabilized with a new medication and reduced stress. Alessandro had quietly taken care of all her medical bills, not as charity, but as something he simply did, the way any father would. She'd allowed it after much discussion, finally accepting that sometimes accepting help was an act of strength rather than weakness. She and Alessandro met for coffee every Sunday now, slowly building a relationship that would never be simple or uncomplicated, but was real nonetheless. They talked about Maria, about their respective lives, about trying to move forward while honoring the past. I'll never call you Dad, Teresa told him one Sunday morning. That word belongs to the man who raised me, who was there when you weren't. I understand. I don't deserve it anyway, but I will call you Alessandro, and I will let you be part of my life, part of Amara's life, if you continue to respect our boundaries and our choices. Always, he promised. I learned too late what happens when you don't respect the people you love. I won't make that mistake again. 6 months after that fateful charity gala, the family gathered again, this time for something joyful. Amara's graduation from her university program, her bachelor's degree in linguistics finally complete. She transferred to a full-time program thanks to scholarship support from Daniel and the freedom from financial stress that Alessandro's help with Teresa's medical bills had provided. They all sat together in the auditorium, Teresa, Alessandro, and Daniel, watching as Amara crossed the stage to receive her diploma. Teresa cried with pride. Alessandro's eyes shone with tears as he watched his granddaughter achieve something his first love had always dreamed of. Daniel cheered loudly, earning amused glances from the surrounding families. After the ceremony, they celebrated at a small Sicilian restaurant Alessandro had discovered. The owner, a woman from the same region as Maria, recognized Alessandro's accent immediately, and they spent 20 minutes speaking in rapid dialect, comparing notes about villages and families and the Sicily they'd both left behind. You should take them there, the restaurant owner said, gesturing to Teresa and Amara. Show them where they come from. Those roots matter. The idea planted itself in all their minds. Over dinner, they discussed the possibility. A trip to Sicily, to the village where Maria and Alessandro had fallen in love, where Teresa had been conceived, where the whole complicated story had begun. I'm not sure I'm ready, Teresa admitted. It still feels too raw, too connected to everything that hurt my mother. Then we wait until you are ready, Alessandro said simply. Or we don't go at all. Whatever you need. But Amara saw the longing in her mother's eyes, the curiosity beneath the fear. What if we went together? All of us. Not to dwell on the pain, but to reclaim that piece of our history. To see the place that shaped Nana Maria into the strong woman she became. 3 months later, they stood together on a hillside in western Sicily, looking down at a small coastal village where whitewashed houses tumbled toward the impossibly blue Mediterranean. The same olive groves where Alessandro and Maria had met in secret still dotted the landscape. The same sea cliffs where they'd made promises they couldn't keep still stood eternal and beautiful. This is where she grew up, Alessandro said softly, pointing to a small house near the harbor. That was her family's home. Her father kept his fishing boat right there in the marina. Teresa stood very still, taking it all in. Amara held her hand, offering silent support. Daniel stood slightly apart, giving them space for this moment. It's beautiful, Teresa finally said. I always imagined it would be somehow dark or oppressive, the place that drove her away. But it's just beautiful. The place wasn't what hurt her, Alessandro said quietly. It was the people, their prejudices, their cruelty, their small-minded obsession with status and propriety. The land itself, the sea, the villages, they're innocent. Beautiful, as you say. They spent 3 days in Sicily, visiting the village, meeting some of the few remaining old-timers who remembered both Alessandro and Maria. One elderly woman, ancient and bent but with sharp eyes, grabbed Teresa's hand when they were introduced. "You have her face," she said in Sicilian dialect. Maria's face. She was special, that one. Too good for this place, too big for the boxes we try to put her in. I'm glad she got away. Glad she had a life beyond here. You knew her? Teresa asked, switching to the dialect Amara had been teaching her. We were friends as girls. I always wondered what became of her after she left. And now here you are, her daughter, coming home to visit the place she had to run from. There's poetry in that. That evening, they sat at a small restaurant overlooking the sea, eating fresh fish and drinking local wine. The sun set in spectacular colors over the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. I understand her better now, Teresa said, watching the sunset. Why she left, why she could never come back, why she buried this part of herself. But I also understand that she'd want us to reclaim it, to take the beauty and the culture and the language and let go of the pain. That's exactly what she'd want, Alessandro agreed. She was practical and forward-thinking. She'd tell us to stop dwelling on old wounds and start building something new. Amara raised her glass. To Nana Maria, who gave us strength, resilience, and the courage to start over. And to all of us for finally finding each other. They clinked glasses as the sun dipped below the horizon. The 4 of them connected by blood and choice, by history and hope, by the complicated, beautiful mess of what family actually means. The final evening of their trip, Amara stood alone on the beach where Alessandro said he and Maria used to walk. She let the waves wash over her feet and thought about the journey that had brought her here, from invisible waitress to beloved granddaughter, from struggling student to graduate with real prospects, from isolated and alone to part of an imperfect but genuine family. She pulled out her phone and recorded a voice memo, knowing she'd want to remember this feeling. I didn't find wealth that night at the gala when I greeted a stranger in my grandmother's dialect, she said softly. I found something harder and far more valuable. I found the courage to belong without losing myself. I found family that doesn't require me to be anyone other than who I am. I found a history that's mine to claim or release as I choose. And most importantly, I found that sometimes the things we're most afraid of discovering are exactly what we need to make us whole. She ended the recording and looked up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. Somewhere, she liked to think her grandmother was watching, not with regret for the past, but with joy for the future her strength had made possible. When Amara returned to the restaurant, her family was waiting, Teresa and Alessandro deep in conversation about Maria's favorite foods, Daniel showing them something on his phone and laughing. They looked up when she approached, making space for her at the table with smiles of welcome and belonging. She sat down among them, and for the first time in her life, felt completely at home, not because of where she was, but because of who she was with. Family, in all its complicated, beautiful, hard-won glory. And that was worth everything. When the truth we've spent our whole lives running from finally catches up to us, do we have the courage to face it, or do we keep hiding in the safety of lies? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about family, secrets, and the courage it takes to finally belong.